I'll show how to build a financial dashboard in Tableau designed for CFO-level decision-making, with key metrics with year-over-year changes, a trend line comparing this year to last, and a waterfall chart breaking down the income statement, plus a show-hide filter to reduce clutter and an info tooltip for extra context. To get started, I'm connecting to an Excel file that has some financial data. Before jumping into the visuals, I like to map out the layout first. So I'll create a dashboard and resize it to fit the screen. And to make it simple, I'm going to use text boxes for the background. So I'll drag a text object in and hit OK. I don't need to add any text because I'm just using this as a container. I'll set the position to 0, 0 and the size to match the size of the dashboard. And I'll make the background color light gray because this is my base layer. I'll drag in another text box, but this time I'm going to resize it so it leaves a little bit of space around the edges, kind of like a border. And while the first one was just a base layer, this is the background that's going to be the most visible. So I'll set the color to white. And now I need to create boxes for my visuals, so I'm going to repeat that same process. Dragging in a text box, resizing it, and setting light background colors and borders to section off the layout. To save time, I won't show it, but I'm repeating that same process to create a full layout using just empty text boxes. And my plan is to use the little cards at the top left to show the key metrics and their year-over-year change. So I'll start off on an empty worksheet to create these. And I want to use these to highlight performance metrics that analyze efficiency and profitability. So I'm going to create them using calculated fields. I'll start with gross margin, which is the sum of the gross profit divided by the sum of the revenue. And I wrap these in the sum function to make sure that Tableau adds everything up first, then does the division. The second calculated field I'll create is for the operating margin. And this is the sum of the operating income divided by the sum of the revenue. And the last one will be for the return on assets. This one is the sum of the net income divided by the sum of the assets. Now that I have my three metrics, I'm going to double-click on measure names to create a table. But I don't need all these extra ones, so I'm going to remove all the ones that I don't need. I chose these key metrics because 1, they show how efficiently the business is running, not just totals like revenue. And 2, to show you can create these KPI cards with calculated fields, and not just have to rely on fields already within your dataset. My dataset also has multiple years, so I'm going to drag date into the filters and choose a relative date. That way I can select this year only. I'll start by formatting the headers so they're a little bit bigger and a little bit lighter. Then for the alignment, I'll choose center. And to get rid of those lines, I'm going to go to borders so I can remove the row divider. To format the values, I'll use text within the marks. And I'm going to make this a little bit bolder and a lot bigger since these values are the ones that matter the most. Then I'll use text to go to the alignment so I can center them. And since these are all going to be percentages, instead of formatting the measure values one at a time, I'm going to right-click on Measure Values and hit Format. That way, when I change the number formatting to a percentage with 1 decimal, it adjusts all the measure values in the table to that format. To add the deltas or year-to-year change, I'll start by duplicating our gross margin field. Then I'll edit this field, and before the gross profit field, I'm going to type if the year of the date equals the year of today. Then do the gross profit, and put an end at the end. So this is going to give me the gross profit for this year. And I'll repeat that same structure for the revenue, which is going to give us the gross margin for this year. Then I'll wrap this whole function in parentheses and copy what we have. I'll type a minus sign and paste. And after the year of today, I'm going to add a -1. That way I'm getting last year's gross margin. So this is going to give us the delta or year-over-year change in gross margin, which is just this year's minus last year's. I'm going to go ahead and quickly fast forward through me doing the same thing for the operating margin and the return on assets. To save time on formatting, I'm going to duplicate the worksheet. Then I'll pull in our 3 deltas and remove our 3 original metrics. And I also need to remove our date filter since we're looking at the year-over-year changes. I'm going to start by removing the header, and I want to add little arrows that show whether it's a positive or negative change. So I'll right-click on measure values to format them. And this time I'm going to do custom formatting. And I'm going to copy and paste the Unicode upward triangle character before everything. Then I'll type a semicolon to separate the positive and negative values. And I'll copy and paste the downward triangle and type 0.0%. Then I'll type another colon and 0.0%. Tableau uses this 3-part custom number format syntax. So it's the positive format, semicolon, the negative format, semicolon, and the 0 format. To make these colored by positive or negative, I'll drag measure values into the marks and make this a color. Then I'll edit the colors using the legend and choose Custom Diverging Palette. On the left side, which will be negative values, I'm going to make this a red. And on the right side, which will be positive values, I'll make this green. Then to ensure I'm only using 2 colors, I'm going to check off Stepped Color and make this only 2 steps. And I also want to make sure 0 is always the center. So I'm going to go to Advanced, select Center, and keep it at 0. To format the text itself, I'll use text within the marks. And I'll make this a little bit smaller and less bold. Then I'll rename this worksheet to be for the metrics change. And on the dashboard, I'll start by adding both our worksheets. I'll hide the title of both worksheets. Then I'll set both of them to the entire view. And since I'm going to move these into the little boxes I created, I don't want the white background stretching all the way across. So I'll format the worksheet to remove the background. And I'll do this for the changes as well. Then I'll move the changes into the boxes under their current year metrics. This is a super small thing, but I don't like how the headers stretch all the way across to the edges of the boxes. So a little hack to fix that without changing the size is to edit the alias and add a few extra spaces between the words. That's going to force the text into 2 lines so it doesn't feel as crammed. It's a small aesthetic tweak, but it makes everything easier to read. And now we have a super simple way to display the key metrics and their year-over-year changes. This next visual answers a question I get a lot, which is how to show this year versus last year on a line chart, especially when this year isn't finished yet. Since this is a trend over time, I'll start by adding the date field to the columns. Then I'll right-click to make this a month. But I don't want to use the continuous version that includes the year, because I want both this year and last year to appear on the same axis. Since they have different years, I'm going to use the discrete month format instead. And I'll just pick any metric like revenue and pull it to the rows. Then I'll pull revenue to the rows again. But you can see this is giving us the same result. To get one line to show last year and one line to show this year, I'll create a calculated field. And I'll start off with this year's revenue. I'll type if the year of the date equals the year of today, then the revenue field. So this is going to give us this year's revenue. I'll pull the this year's field into the view. And you can see that even though this year stops at August, the axis still goes to the end of the year. Next, I'll duplicate the this year field so I can edit it and get last year's revenue. And for the formula, all I need to do is add a -1 after the year of today. So now we have 2 separate fields, one that holds this year's revenue values and one that holds last year's revenue values. And since these are on the same axis, the order doesn't really matter. I'm going to right-click on one of these measure values to make it a dual axis. Then I'll right-click on the axis to synchronize it. And I'm also just going to edit the axis so that I don't have to include 0. So now we've got this year and last year on the same axis in the same worksheet, even though this year only goes through August. And that's why we see the 4 nulls at the end. But we don't want to filter out those months, so we can just leave them there, and once we publish, the null indicator won't show. Currently, these lines represent revenue, but I want to show you how you can expand this to other metrics. It's a quick way to add more data options without clutter. So I'll start by creating a parameter so I can list out all of our options. I'll change the data type to a string, and in the allowable values, select list. And here's where I'm going to type out all of the metrics I want users to have the option to choose. And I'm showing a lot of options here, but you can customize this to include as few or as many as you need. And now all I need to do is update the this year formula to tell Tableau which values to show based on the metrics selected in the parameter. So after my if this is the current year statement, then I want to do a case condition, depending what's in the parameter. So I'll type when the text revenue in the parameter, then give me the revenue field. And I just need to keep repeating this process for all the metrics in my parameter. So when my parameter is cost of goods sold, then show the cost of goods sold metric. And I'll just keep going through this for all my options. And at the bottom, I need to type N twice to close out the if and case statements. Tableau now knows which metric to show for the current year line. And to save time, I'm going to copy this since the structure is going to be the same for the last year formula. So I'm just going to repeat that same process with last year. That didn't take long at all, and now this line chart is way more useful since I can see the trend for multiple metrics. But let's say you don't want to use the second mark for one of the years, and instead you want to use the second mark for a custom marker, Not the small default ones you get from using color within the marks, but a fully customized marker you can only get with a dual access. Since Tableau limits you to just one dual access per worksheet, I'll show how to go beyond that and create as many synchronized axes as you want. And I think the use cases for this is really limitless. I'm going to start by treating this worksheet like it's for this year only. So I'll pull this year in to replace last year. Then I'll edit the access so I can uncheck including 0. And I want to get this fully customized before I add last year. So within the second marks, I'm going to change the mark type to a shape. Then I'll use shapes in the mark so I can choose a shape that I loaded in. And this is just a circle with a shadow effect around it. Then I'll remove the measure name coloring. For the first mark, I'm also going to remove the measure name coloring. And I'll use color in the marks to pick a custom color. I'll pick a navy color for this year because I want it to stand out and emphasize the current year. Then I'll edit the left access, and I'm just going to remove the title. And we don't need the repeat access, so I'm going to remove it. I'll hide the field label and format the worksheet. For shading, I'm going to choose none. And for the borders, I'm going to remove the row and column dividers. And for the lines, I'll go to rows so I can remove the grid lines. I'm also going to format the months so that the dates are just using the first letter. And I'm also just going to make these headers darker and bold. And now that I have this fully formatted, I'll right-click on the This Year worksheet to duplicate it. And I'll call this new worksheet Last Year. All I need to do is replace this year with the last year field. Then I'll edit the access so I can uncheck including 0 again. And I'll remove the repeat access. Within the first mark, I'll use color to choose a dark gray for this line. So now we have two worksheets that both use a dual access, but you can see the axes don't match. And that's because each sheet is adjusting its access based on the minimum and maximum values within its view. This is where the magic of this method comes in. It lets you scale way beyond a typical dual access because you can sync as many axes as you want across worksheets. And once they're aligned, you can layer visuals however you want on a dashboard. So I'm going to start by creating a calculative field to identify the minimum value across both worksheets. And first I need to figure out what are all the values on this worksheet. So for every month, what's the last year value? Then I want to know of all those values, what's the minimum? So this is going to give me the minimum value within this worksheet. I'll copy this line, do a less than sign, and then paste it. And I just need to change the last year field to the this year field. So if the minimum value on this worksheet is less than the minimum value on the other worksheet, then give me the minimum value on this worksheet. Otherwise, give me the minimum value on the other worksheet. And I'll just wrap this in an if and end to complete the condition. It looks a little complicated, but this calculated field is just returning the lowest monthly value between the two worksheets. So now that I have my lower bound, I also need to create my upper bound. I'm going to duplicate the field and edit it so I can identify the maximum value across both worksheets. And all I need to do is change the minimums to maximums, since this is for the upper bound. Then I'll change less than to be greater than. I used LODs here because I want to calculate outside of what's in our views. To make these values lock in the upper and lower bounds of our axes, I'll add them to the marks. Then I'll go to the Analytics tab and add a reference line for the table. I'll start with the upper bound, which is the maximum values, and I'll take the maximum. For now, I'll label the line with the value so you can see how it works visually. I'm going to go to the other worksheet and do the same thing, adding in the min and max values to the marks, and then adding a reference line for the maximum values. And you can see the maximum value, which is like 1.25 billion, is now the actual maximum bound of the axis. And the dot with that value lines up exactly where it intersects the line. But if we go to the other worksheet, the top of the axis still goes to 1.25 billion, even though none of the dots reach that height. So we've created a dynamic upper bound for the axes. And now I just need to sync the lower bounds as well. So I'll drag a reference line in for the table, and this time choose the minimum value and take the minimum. So even though this worksheet doesn't have the maximum value between both worksheets, we can see it has the minimum. I'll repeat that same process for the other worksheet and pull in a reference line so I can set it to the minimum value. This little trick helps us anchor the axes by using consistent minimum and maximum values across worksheets. And since Tableau has to include the reference line, it stretches the access to that value instead of adjusting it based on only the marks in the view. And the best part is we can make the reference lines invisible. So while they're quietly capping the top and bottom of the axis, no one will even notice. Now I'm just going to go through and hide all these reference lines. The ability to sync axes across worksheets gives you so much more flexibility, because you're not just limited to a dual axis anymore. This opens up a ton of options for customizing your visuals, like layering different chart types, using different mark styles, or combining views that normally wouldn't share an axis. And to finish, we just need to lay these worksheets on top of each other within a dashboard. So I'll bring both of these worksheets in. And since our headers are the same, I'm going to remove them on one of the worksheets. Then I'll hide the titles of both worksheets. And I'll resize this one so that it fits in my container. Then for the other one, I'm just going to lay it on top, making sure to align as well as I can. And if you have a little bit trouble with aligning, you can use the grid lines by pressing G on your keyboard. Since the current year is more important, I'm going to go to the Layout tab so I can move that worksheet to the front. Now we can switch the metrics, and the axes will adjust automatically based on the range of the selected metric. But I don't like how small the current metric selection is, and I need a title for my visual. So I'm going to customize my parameter and add a title to my visual in this new worksheet. To do this, I just need to edit the title. And I'm going to go to Insert and choose my parameter. Then I'll type the word trend after. I'm going to make this a little bit more bold and size 14 font. Now you can see net income is selected, so it says net income trend. On the dashboard, I'll add our parameter/title worksheet. And I still need the functionality of the parameter, I just don't want to show it as it is now. So I'm going to hide the title of the parameter. Then I'll resize it so all I see is the drop-down arrow. And I'll move it next to the title. I could format the title directly and add shading and a border, but the text now looks super crammed in there. So I'm going to go back to what I had before and instead use the Layout tab so I can change the border and the background of the worksheet, not just the title. And now we have a lot more space vertically. To add some spacing horizontally, I'll edit the title and add a couple spaces at the beginning. Then I'll use the item hierarchy so I can drag the parameter in front of the title. Then I'll tweak the positioning to make it look like one seamless filter, even though it's actually just a worksheet title and a filter dropdown. Now users can select any metric they want to compare last year's trend to the current year. I also want to label which line represents last year and which one represents this year. So I'm going to add a legend. But I don't want a default legend. I want one that matches the chart with a line and a circle marker in the center. So on this new worksheet, I'll create the legend. I'll start by pulling measure names into the rows. Then I'll pull measure values into the marks. And within the measure value list, I just want to have last year and this year, since these are the two values I want to include in the legend. To prioritize this year, I'll have it be the first measure value. And since this year and last year are measure names, I'll pull measure names into the marks. Then I'll change the mark type to a shape and make measure names determine the shape. I'll pull measure names in again and make this a label. Then to get better spacing, I'll type 0 into the columns. So now we have the shape to the left of the text. We don't need these headers, so I'm going to remove them. Then I'll use the legend to edit the shapes. That way I can assign shapes that match my visual. So these are just images I created in Canva that have a line with a circle going through it, and I'll have these linked in my description. I can use the size slider to increase the size of these shapes. Next, I'll format the worksheet so I can remove the shading. Under lines, I'll remove the 0 lines and the axis rulers. Then I'll go to columns so I can remove the grid lines. To format the text itself, I'll use label within the marks. I'll make this Tableau regular, and I want to add a few spaces to the beginning of the text so it's not as close to the shape. Then on the dashboard, I'll add our custom legend. To make this look like a legend, I'll hide the title of the worksheet and then resize it to be in the upper right corner of my visual. And I want to make sure this is set to fill the entire view. But the images are still a bit small, so I'll go to the worksheet to use the size slider to increase the size. And we don't need the default legend anymore, so I'm going to remove that. I like the size of the circles on my legend, so I want the visuals to match. So I'm going to go to the worksheets and increase the size of the shapes. By building a custom legend, we not only make it match the visual, but we can also get full control over the design, making it more intuitive for users to quickly understand what everything represents. All the metrics in this dataset make up the income statement. So I'm going to show how to build a waterfall chart using income statement data. It'll capture the full story of a company's financial flow. To pivot the data for the waterfall chart without affecting my other visuals, I'm connecting to the same data source again. This gives me two separate connections, one for my existing visuals and one for my income statement chart. And you could definitely do this with just one source by adjusting your other visuals to account for the pivot, but I don't want to risk confusing anything. So on this data source meant for the waterfall chart, I'll start by selecting all the metrics. Then I'm going to right-click and hit Pivot. This gives us pivot names and pivot values, which are much more flexible than measure names and measure values. And we only need two simple calculated fields for this. So I'm bringing in pivot field names and pivot field values so you can see the back end of how we're transforming the data. Right now, everything, even things like cost of goods sold, show as positive values. So the first calculated field I'm creating is just going to identify which fields should be treated as negatives. So I'll type if the pivot field names equals the cost of goods sold, the income tax, the interest expense, or the operating expenses, then do negative of the pivot field values. Else we want the positive of the pivot field values. You can skip this step if your values are already in positive and negative form. So when I bring this new field in, you can see all of our costs or expenses are negative. And if you have other metrics in your dataset that you don't want to include in your waterfall chart, you can use the pivot field names to filter them out. Then I'll create another calculated field to identify where values should start. I'll write a calculation so that if pivot field names is a field that's a calculation itself, like how gross profit is revenue minus cost of goods sold, it'll have a starting position of 0. Else, I want to use the values with the positive and negatives to identify where to start. So when I bring this in, you can see calculations start at 0. And that's because these represent a subtotal or total, so they're not an additional flow of money. They're acting as checkpoints to show the results so far. Whereas fields like revenue or cost of goods sold keep their actual values because we want to show the true inflows and outflows along the way. To build out the waterfall chart, which just takes a few steps, I'm going to remove everything from the view to build it from scratch. I'll start by pulling pivot field names into the columns. To get these in the right order, I'll sort the pivot field names. I'll choose to sort this manually and put this in the same order as the income statement. And the order here matters because each step builds on the previous one. Then I'll drag our starting field into the rows. And you can see that COGS shows the correct value, but it's not factoring in the step before, which is revenue. So I'll right-click on the starting field, go to Quick Table Calculation, and select Running Total. Since bar charts always start at 0, but in a waterfall chart we need to control where each bar starts, I'm going to change the mark type from bar to a Gantt bar. And this is going to give us a floating bar that we can control, both the starting point and the length. So now all the bars start at the right place based on the steps that came before, but they aren't filled in yet. So I'll bring our positive and negative values field into the marks. Even though the values have positive and negatives, Tableau treats size like an absolute value and just grows the bars outwards. So I'm adding a negative sign to flip the directions, so decreases actually move down instead of up. Then I'll make this determine the size. Now we have the basic structure of the waterfall chart, showing positive flows like revenue, negative flows like cost of goods sold, and subtotals like gross profit. Next, I'm going to format this to make it more intuitive. I'll start by adding the values to the marks card so we can make it a label for each bar. Then I'll format the values so I can change the number formatting to a custom currency. I'll change it to be in billions with 1 decimal place. And my dataset has more than just 1 year. So I'm going to filter by date, so I'm looking at just this year's income statement. I also want to use colors to help tell the story. So I'll drag pivot field names into the marks card and make it determine the color of each bar. I'll make positive flows like revenue green, negative flows like cost of goods sold, expenses, and taxes red. I'm going to use gray for subtotals and totals like gross profit and net income. Then I'll use color in the marks to decrease the opacity a little bit so it's not as vibrant. For pivot field names, I'm going to hide the field label. Then I'll edit the access so I can remove the title. And I'm also going to format the access so I can make the font darker and Tableau regular. To format these values, I'll click on it within the marks so I can make it Tableau regular. And I'll do the same thing with headers, making them a little bit darker and Tableau regular. This way we're getting consistent formatting across the visual. On the dashboard, I'll add the Waterfall income statement worksheet. And since it's against a light gray background, I'm going to format the worksheet so I can remove the shading. Then I'll hide the title of the worksheet and resize it so it fills up this container. To add a title to this visual, I'll drag in a text object. And I'll call this income statement, change the text to Tableau medium, and size 14. I'll also make this dark gray and center the text. I'll move the text object above the visual. And I'm going to drag it out on both sides and a little bit vertically so that it acts more as a container than just a line of text. Then I'll use the Layout tab to change the border in the background so it aligns with the style of the rest of the dashboard. Next, I'm going to show how to add a filter even though my data is technically coming from two data sources. I have one data source powering the metrics worksheet, which includes fields like division and region. And I have a separate data source for the income statement worksheet, which includes those same fields. But I don't want to join the two, and it's because some worksheets like this one use fixed LOD calculations. And these are not going to respond to the filters in one data source if they're joined in the usual way. So instead I'll use sets to filter across data sources and make sure the filters still work within fixed LODs. I'll right-click on the field, go to Create, and choose Set. And I'll set this to Use All. Then I'll repeat the same process for region. And a set is basically a custom list of values. So I can use this list of values across worksheets and with fixed LODs. On the metrics worksheet, I'm going to bring the sets into the filters. Then I'll right-click so I can apply it to the worksheets that I want to filter within the dashboard. Dragging a set to filters just turns the set into a filter. If I go back to the worksheet with the LOD and right-click to show the set, and then change the values included, you can see the LOD doesn't respond. That's why the max value is much higher than the actual maximums on these worksheets. So to fix that, I just need to include the set logic directly in the LOD calculation. After the aggregate function, I'm going to type if division in division set and region in region set. Then my measure. And this works because we're telling Tableau to only include records in the set before performing the LOD. And I'll just copy that logic down for all of my LODs. And I have a minimum LOD as well, so I'm just going to fast forward through me adding that set logic. Now you can see the sets are being applied correctly in the LODs. The minimum line is being crossed, which means the value is actually hitting that limit. And the maximum line is being crossed, so the value is hitting that limit as well. Now for the worksheet using the other data source. You can see that when I go to the data source with the sets, they're grayed out, which means we can't just drag them into the filter shelf. But we can still use them in this worksheet. I'll create a calculated field to use the region and division set to filter. And all I need to type is region and region set and division set. So this is going to return true when the values are in the sets. Then I'll bring this field into the filters and select only true. Then I'll click the little link icon for division and region. And now that these sets filter all the worksheets, I'll add them to the dashboard. So I'll go to a worksheet, click the down arrow, go to sets, and add both the sets in. Sets let us define a group of values once and reuse that logic across different sheets and calculations. And as I change the selection in these sets, you can see they're correctly filtering all of the visuals. And just like with filters, we can format these. I'm going to edit the title to remove the word set because users probably don't know what this means and it makes it more simple. And now they look and act just like a filter. But you can see there's not really a place to include both of these sets within the dashboard. And I don't want to do a drop-down option. So instead I'm going to add a vertical container. Then I'll hit Shift on my keyboard and move both of these sets into the vertical container. And you can add anything in here, from filters to sets to buttons and even worksheets. Then I'll click on the down arrow so I can add a Show Hide button. In Tableau Desktop, hold Alt and click the button to show or hide the container. But once it's published or in presentation mode, you can just click the button. To customize this, I'll edit the button. And you can see we have the option for text or an image. And when items are shown, I'll choose an image that has an X. But when items are hidden, I'll use an image with a filter icon. And because these are just images, you can use whatever icon or visuals you want. And clicking this intuitive button now shows and hides the container. You can also select the container to move it anywhere you want on the dashboard. And you can move and resize the button anywhere you want. And because the button and the container are positioned independently, the button doesn't have to be directly next to the container it controls. And now we've added a Show Hide button for our filters or sets, which helps reduce clutter and keeps everything fitting neatly on the dashboard, without having to rely on drop-downs. It's a simple trick, but it adds flexibility and keeps the design clean. Let's say there's some extra content I want to give users about this dashboard, but I don't want to add a static text box that takes up space. Instead, I can create an information tooltip, where users can hover to see helpful text and even dynamic values like measures. And we just need a worksheet for this. Using Tooltip in the marks, I can add any text I want. And there's even an insert option where you can add more details. So within the view, I'm going to start by adding date to the marks. Then I'll right-click so I can make this a month-year format. I'll add date to the filters and choose month-year. That way, with the top condition, I can focus on just the most recent month-year in the dataset. Then using the tooltip, I'll go to Insert and choose the month of the date field. So now we have the most recent month-year and in the format that we defined in the marks. But the square isn't very intuitive for a tooltip, so I'm going to switch the mark type to a shape. That way I can use shape in the marks and choose any image I want. And I'm just using a circle with an eye in the middle to represent information, because this is a simple familiar icon that signals it's a tooltip. And you can use the size slider to increase the size of the icon. To add this to the dashboard, I just need to add the Info Tooltip worksheet. I'll hide the title of the worksheet and resize it. Then I'll set this to fill the entire view. And now we've added an information tooltip to the dashboard. It's a simple way to give users extra context without cluttering the layout. Whether it's instructions, definitions, or even dynamic metrics, tooltips let you keep things clean while still delivering all the details users might need. So that's a financial dashboard built in Tableau and designed for CFO-level decisions. We've got high-level KPIs, trend analysis, and a waterfall income statement. And this is designed to give a clear snapshot of performance without overwhelming the view.